The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Steven Zakash here again with my co-host, Tulio Saragusa, and our special guest, Bruce Cleveland. So in May of 2025, Bruce joined us to explore one of the most difficult challenges in business, how to build a company that does not merely launch, but successfully scales. And that conversation focused on the traction gap, the critical period between introducing a product and developing the repeatability, the traction, and the momentum necessary to sustainable growth. So one of the central lessons was that companies cannot assume a strong product will sell itself. They must intentionally build the category, the narrative, the systems, and market understanding around it. And today, Bruce is returning with a new book that takes the idea further, Marketing Engineering, because markets don't build themselves. And the book challenges leaders to apply the same intentionality and rigor to creating markets that already apply to engineering products. It presents a framework for category design, positioning, messaging, storytelling, and thought leadership. And today, we will explore how markets are deliberately shaped and why product innovation alone is not enough, and how leaders can build market narratives that remain meaningful in the age of AI. Tulio, introduce Bruce Cleveland to our audience if they are not familiar with him.
It'll be my pleasure. Our returning guest is Bruce Cleveland. He's the founder and CEO of Traction Gap Partners. He's an author, technology operating executive, venture capitalist, and entrepreneur. Bruce has held senior executive positions at Oracle, Apple, Siebel Systems, and C3 AI. He has served as general partner at 2 venture capital firms and was also the founder and CEO of Ziplines Education. His venture investments include Marketo, C3 AI, Vlocity, and Doximity. Several of those investments began as ideas without products or revenue and ultimately grew into billion-dollar outcomes. Bruce is the author of the best-selling book, Traversing the Traction Gap, and his newest book, Market Engineering, because markets don't build themselves. Today, he advises startups, enterprises, boards, and venture firms using the Traction Gap framework and market engineering methodology. Bruce, welcome back to the Bliss Business Podcast. I'm really excited about our conversation today. I've been very fortunate to be part of 3 market engineering efforts in my career. Not that I produced them, but I was part of it. When MCI broke the telecom industry, when Softic introduced nearshore services, and then, of course, when Axiom introduced cloud computing to the world. And it was, at the time, we had no idea what we were doing. But afterwards, you realize, oh, my gosh, we changed an entire industry. And it's really, you learn so much from that. So I'm really excited to learn from your new book, from your new teachings that you want to share with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, Bruce, is great to have you back. So during your first appearance, we discussed how companies traverse the gap between creating a product and achieving scalable market traction. What inspired you to write Market Engineering, and how does that book challenge the way most leaders think about building markets, not just products?
Yeah, great question. So here's, when I wrote that first book, it was really more of a roadmap for people from ideation to scale. And it describes several what I call value inflection points in time. That's a point in time that you've reached with your product and company that you've proven something. By proving something, you've dramatically reduced risk while also significantly improving the value of your company. And for professional investing, that's what VCs look for, is are you able to move the company forward in a way that produces both of those outcomes. And I wanted to describe this process because I didn't think that people were really thinking about it that way. It was sort of random acts of marketing and sales that seemed to occur, and I wanted to put a process in place that people could think about, a framework that people could think of in order to figure out we are here and how do we get from where we are to the next one, the next spot. So that book was really this roadmap to go from ideation to something called minimum viable category, some new category we've created, initial product release. Then we reach MVP or minimum viable product, and I have a different way of expressing that. I don't think about it as product market fit. I think about it as market product fit. Without a market, there's no real demand or interest or awareness of your product. From there, we go on to MVR, minimum viable repeatability, and then finally minimum viable traction. That's enough acronyms. So the point was, hey, where are we? What should we be doing and focused on, et cetera? So in that book, I introduced this term called market engineering. And I defined it, as you aptly said, around these 5 tenets, the category design or redesign, something that my friend Christopher Lochhead and his team with Play Bigger introduced to the world, which I completely buy into. And then positioning, where do we fit in and how do we stand out? Messaging, what is the language we're going to use? I think Christopher calls it languaging. You know, how do we create new language so people pay attention to what we're saying? Storytelling, Steve Jobs, probably one of the most famous storytellers I know, at least in the business world, who could alter our reality, or at least alter our perception of reality. And then if you did all those, thought leadership would inure to you. And what I discovered is that if you could do all those, generate thought leadership, people want to hang with you. They want to hang with your company. They want to go to your events. They want to buy your products. And you can eventually become potentially a market leader. And I found that although very few of the people at the time I wrote the book of Traction Gap, Traversing the Traction Gap, although nobody used that term, that was the term I invented at the time to explain what those 5 things were and to talk about different people and companies that were good at it, even if they didn't say they were market engineers. So inside of me, I always knew, I said, I really didn't explore that topic enough for people. I showed them the roadmap, but I think that there's another book in there, a recipe book, a prescriptive guide that shows you how to actually drive the car to get to the destination. That's probably a mixed metaphor, but anyway, the point is that how do we apply this? And I realized, I said, there's different companies. They look like they have the same product. It look like both are really good teams. Both are well financed. And a year or two later, one is dead and the other is the market leader. And I realized, I went, well, it's really one knew how to mix or combine this recipe of market engineering and to basically blow out the rest of the companies. So I thought, well, I like writing prescriptively, prescriptive guides. The first book is one you can look at. I have a lot of people come back and it's dog-eared, right? We're here, Bruce. We want to move to the next spot or whatever. So I said, well, I want to write the same way because I don't like these business books where when I'm done, I don't really know, okay, that's great. I learned what X, Y, or Z company did, but how do I do this? So I wrote this book. I knew it was in the back of my head. It took me about 5 years to get around to actually going through the pain of writing it and then publishing it. But that's why I wrote it. It was in there. I think it is the sequel or potentially the flip side of the same coin for the first book. So if you've read the first book and you bought into it, then this is the complement to it. One difference is the first book I wrote as a B2B SaaS oriented book because as a venture capitalist, that was what I was investing in at the time. I re-architected this book because market engineering is really suitable for any company in any industry at any stage. Turns out maybe startups have 80 to 95 VC back. These are the best. 80 to 95% failure rates. And so when I did the research for this book, it turns out that up to 60% of new products launched by enterprise companies, large mature companies, also fail. So a failure in the startup is existential. But a failure in a larger company is experiential, and so they're both not good. And so I wrote this book to be for a much wider audience. And in spite of the name, market engineering, it's not a book really targeting marketers per se. It's a book targeting CEOs who I think need to lead the market engineering process. The CMO is involved, and so is the CRO, the CFO, the COO, and the EIEIO. Everybody is involved in helping, but the CEO has to be the chief market engineer, not chief marketing engineer, the chief market engineer, because they control the resources across the company that have to change product, revenue, team, systems in order to achieve this market engineering objective. So that's why I wrote the book. And I'm sorry that it took me longer than what I originally thought it would take, but
That's
it
okay.
did.
Let's dig into this a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you said something very interesting, very common. Most companies are looking for market fit. They're identifying the TAM. They're trying to solve a problem within the problem. So, the traditional way that you shape an opportunity, and you're usually discovering a market fit, right? But you argue that markets can actually be engineered rather than simply discovered. What does that mean in practical terms? Like for a new venture or even an established company who's trying to either introduce something new or reinvent themselves, how do they need to think about this? Because it's very different than trying to discover a fit. You're actually creating something that didn't exist in some cases.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we conflate market with category, and while they're related, they're interrelated, but they are different. Markets are generally inherited; they exist. We may not know they exist, but they do exist. But they have to be coalesced. Categories are things that we can create. So if you think about it, the automobile industry is a market. The EV is a category within that market. So when I think about it, when I think about markets, I think about this as a group of companies, people, problems that need to be solved. And then the category becomes the way we name and frame the problem. It becomes how we know what to call it, what to look for. And I'll answer your question directly. I want to use a metaphor I put into the book. I'll use it here, or an analogy. I use sports so think about, well, World Cup's running right now, so let's use soccer, football. So there's a stadium. We have to play a game. The stadium is the category. It's the place where the game is played, and the game has rules. Those are the attributes of the category. So we need to know, all right, what's the game? What's the name of the game? And where is it played? So by having the attributes, which are the rules of the game, the name of the game is the category. We have fans, media, analysts know where the game, those are the people in the stands. They know where this game is going to be played, and they know the rules of the game. So unless we have all of that in place, there's nowhere to play. And it's hard to find the teams. So the teams have to know where to show up and when to show up, et cetera. So the metaphor extends there. The teams are brands. And so the focus on brand initially is really, it's inappropriate. We need to focus first on creating the category, creating the market, which is an interest in the game that's going to be played, and then the teams to be formed to compete. And then the interesting play in market engineering is that just like in soccer, we have set plays. We also have just formations. Those are, and maybe it applies more even in American football, which would be playbooks. So we have playbooks, and playbooks is really what market engineering about, which is we have to operate within the rules of the category. CRM, ERP, BI, those are all well-defined now rules. There are currently well-defined market leaders in those particular categories who change and operate the rule book. But we need a playbook. That allows us to win. And so market engineering is about creating the playbook. Think about Bill Walsh and the West Coast offense with the 49ers. That's classic. So market engineering is about, we have to operate in the same stadium, the same category. We have to operate under the same rules. But what's our playbook? How are we going to be that company that 2 years earlier we were competing against somebody else, equally funded, equally talented? How are we going to beat that and become the market leader? So the point is that these markets and these categories within these markets, you need to go through this engineering work, which is naming, defining, articulating or developing a playbook, and then operating it. And so this is really the market engineering is really an operating system for companies. And to think about it just like in the way that I describe it in the book is product engineering is just a way to get into the game. It's having a team to play the game. It's market engineering, your playbook, that determines winners. And so I looked at this across many, many different companies I either worked for, Oracle when we were a startup, because I joined that long ago, Siebel Systems, C3 AI, the companies I invested in, Marketo was just an idea on a drawing board, basically. Doximity today, a multi-billion-dollar company. These are all companies that I work with that I wasn't the sole contributor, and certainly not in those when I was an investor. I only had, money that I put in and a few ideas. The teams did the work, but each of them have this unique characteristic in that they defined the market, they found the market, they defined the category, and then they compelled the market to coalesce around the category and then to purchase the product. And when you don't do this, I'll define it a different way. You could do everything I talk about in the books and what I do with my clients, and still not be successful. But if you don't do what I'm talking about, I can guarantee you absolutely will not be successful. The only exception might be biotech. If you invent a new molecule that cures some form of cancer, fine. Maybe you get a pass on some of this. The rest of us poor slobs, we suffer from this. So that's how I address that, Tulio. That's the way that I look at it.
So Bruce, thinking about the playbook that you mentioned, so we love talking about systems on here, and that's our big thing is, like you said, we don't want random acts of marketing or random, right? So. Right. So could you walk us through kind of the 5 tenets of market engineering, what category design, positioning, messaging, storytelling, and thought leadership, kind of explain how they the playbook all works together?
Yeah. So those are the ingredients, right? And, just like think about a Michelin star chef versus the short order cook at Denny's. They both have meat, flour, salt, pepper, whatever. But I think we can agree that the outcome is radically different. In this case, those are the ingredients that go into market engineering. There's a few other things as well, but basically those are the foundational ingredients for market engineering. So the first, this idea about category design or redesign. Sometimes you don't need to. If it's a failed category, you don't have to actually redesign define a new one. So that happened with Marketo. We ultimately decided, the team ultimately decided that they would keep marketing automation as the category because it had been a failed category. There had been Unica, Rubrik, Annuncio, a slew of companies that tried to tick that off, and Marketo kind of figured out what the key to that was. But so that was a matter of redefining a category that had existed. But you have to define it for the reasons that we talked about earlier. People need to know, okay, what's the name? What is the game that's played around a particular problem? We have to name the problem. In consumer, we're more about naming the opportunity, less about the problem. So if you think about problem, customer relationship management, CRM, business intelligence, enterprise resource planning. If I say ERP, BI, and CRM today, we all know what we're talking about. At least anybody who's been in the, sort of in the business side of the world. We all know that. I don't have to explain what that stuff is because it's been well traveled through promotion and propagation. So, but initially they weren't. There was no real name. I think when we started Siebel Systems, I think the closest was SFA, Salesforce Automation, and really crappy little products like Telemagic, Brock Controls for team contact, like ACT, contact management, right? So Tom said, hey, we really need to redefine all of this stuff into an enterprise type positioning. So, but that takes a lot of effort. And so here's the ironic part about category naming and defining or redefining. if you are good at it and you come up with a really cool category name that people are going to follow, et cetera, competitors join it. And in fact, they have to. There is no category of one. And so I've had multiple clients come, well, we ought to trademark our category name. I go, no, actually, it's horrible. We're going to do this. And then we're going to compel other people to join the category with us. And they go, you got to be kidding me. We're going to do all this work and people are going to just jump on it. I go, yeah, we're just going to have to be faster.
That's what validates you there.
Exactly. So
the greatest validation you're going to receive.
That exactly, but it is somewhat ironic that
I'm honestly suspect. I'm suspect if you're saying you're going to be the only one in some area.
Yeah,
like
yeah, you'll be the only one with zero revenues in that area. There's a lot of companies who accomplish that every day.
For sure. So that's the first. That's the first tenet. Is okay. Where is this? What's the name of the problem? What are we going to call it? Will other people adopt it? Do you think Gartner will actually? They probably won't initially, like for the first 2 or 3 years until they're clobbered over the head and everybody goes, no, we're going to call it whatever it's going to be. And then the next important piece is positioning. Positioning is where do you fit in and stand out? We're humans. We like to put taxonomies into place or ontologies. We like to figure out, where do I fit in the world? What do I do? It's same with companies, same with products. And so you have to tell people where you fit in, especially if there's an architecture, technology architecture in a company. Where do you fit in that stack? Where do you as a company, if you don't fit in, into their thinking, then there's no budget for what you have. So it could be a great product, but you have to explain how you fit into an existing environment and then how you stand out. How do you make it better? What happens? Do you get rid of some things? Do you solve some things that they couldn't solve before? And you have to do that. You have to write it in crayon for people. You can't make them try to figure it out. So if you go to somebody's website and you read a bunch of pablum around, what, and at the end of the paragraph, you're going, I don't really get what you guys do. Okay, well, that means another 90-day sales cycle while your sales team has to go out and try to beat the bushes and explain what the hell you do. So no, you have to tell people where you fit in and how you stand out, both technically and from a business standpoint, what value comes. So that's that piece. And you have to do it provocatively. If you just use the same words as everybody else, people stop listening. Go into a VC pitch, you go into their, maybe it's via Zoom now, but you go in and you pitch your deal. They tune out. They'll get on their mobile phone. The second, if you don't use words that are new and interesting ideas that are provocative, then people tune out. So you want your own language. I think Christopher I think they call it languaging, which I thought was pretty cool. So language, you need to come up with unique language. So like one of my companies, it's the new cool thing or the thing between agentic systems and reality in production is this thing called semantics. Semantic layer was a big thing at Gartner this last year. And it's going to be a big thing for anybody who wants to put an agentic system in place. You have to have unified semantics, unified meaning across all your data, or your agents are going to go haywire. So everybody's saying semantic layer. Well, I came up for one of my clients, we call it a control plane. So, okay, well, if I say control plane, that's not exactly something that everybody uses. It's not a word. So you go, okay, well, what's that? What do you mean by that? How is that different than layer? Well, if I can get you to ask those questions in an investor meeting or in a customer sales call or a media conversation, I now have your interest. Okay, so that's why positioning and messaging matter. Language and where you fit in and stand out. Storytelling.
I feel like I know that like that languaging for us is really like, there's people that have been talking about empathetic marketing in some way or another. But for us, it was like, what do we do? How do we describe it? Because it's a little bit different. And it is this sort of empathetic marketing. And you kind of go through this process, right? It's almost like a different language sometimes than what other people are using. And I know people have used maybe that term a little bit, but it's really like, we're the only ones doing it with AI and things like that. But so I guess for us, it'd be like empathetic marketing with AI. Is that like a new category or something? Like that would be something that no one's really doing.
Well, I
Just
think
curious, trying to
so. It's kind of
what's
like
out there.
products. When you think about what features you're going to build, you want to market stress test it. You want to talk to people about it. What I found for category naming or others, I always come up with these names, and then I go out and I don't give them the name. I give them like, here's 5 attributes of whatever this thing is, and I have them read that, and then I say,
Mhm.
okay, here's 3 or 4 names. What do you think best fits that? What do you think what would you
Mhm.
react to? And so that's how I do the market testing. I called in the first book, I call it Market IQ. I was
Yeah.
relating primarily to product, but in this particular case, it also is your language that you use. So this is as important, by the way. It's a strategic decision in the company because everything derives from it, and
Yeah.
all the investment that you make, if you screw this up, it's a lot of capital that goes to waste.
Yeah.
So to your point, yeah, coming up with the language is important, and then it's incumbent upon you to explain what the heck you mean. If somebody doesn't get it, you don't. It's like, have you ever experienced people who, if they don't speak your language natively, and then you try speaking louder, you know,
Hey, I think that's a lot what marketing does, is basically they're trying to speak louder. And so this
yeah.
is where we get to that storytelling, right? Is this,
Exactly. So
yeah.
the best storyteller I ever was involved with was Steve Jobs. I think, and there's other great ones too we could talk about, but the best storyteller was Steve. He would go out and he would completely change the way we would think about something, and so that is part of this. There's a group called the Moth, and a book that's about these groups that about storytelling. And I would argue that before you ever start your deck, in a pitch or with a sales pitch or an investor pitch or anything, is start with an epic story. Start with something that's kind of like, I guess the new movie's out, the Odyssey. I haven't seen it, but if I think about it, Iliad and the Homer, it's a great story. And humans we are built for storytelling and story reception, and that's what we remember well. Our brains are wired that way from millions. I don't know about millions, but certainly for a long time, to pass on information via stories. So I think it's important that we learn how to tell an interesting story. Here's a big problem that occurred with this company. It ended in an epic failure, whatever it is. Something, the hero then arrives, and the hero was us, whatever it is. But make it interesting to people. Don't just start, just pummeling them with slides. Tell them something interesting, and then that leads into the transition of who you are, what you do, why you're doing it. It just makes you as a human more interesting, and we don't do enough of that.
We don't. It's interesting you mentioned Steve Jobs because he was very much a design thinking practitioner. And I think one thing I love about design thinking is if you want to be a good storyteller, first be curious and listen. Be a good listener and be curious. And the more you learn, the more you can then concoct a good story. But let's talk about the impact AI is having on all this. One of the things we often discuss here is being purposeful, and everything you're doing requires very much intentionality, being very purposeful, very calculated, very, very much having a system, these tenets, doing it in such a way that's not leaving it to chance. But with AI accelerating product development, features that often used to take years sometimes to create or create differentiation can now be copied or matched very quickly. How does market engineering help companies build durable advantage that competitors cannot easily replicate overnight?
Yeah, well, I think in the age of AI, which I think is going to just be in perpetuity, technology is no longer a moat. I wrote an application that does complete agentic engine optimization and search engine optimization, and does all your tagging, all of your metadata tagging from your JSON, LD, LMS text, sitemaps. I wrote that in 3 days. Which basically is better than anything that SEMrush has or any of these other most of the companies I've seen out there. I could add a lot more, but I don't need to. I wrote it for my clients. I might make it commercially available. I'm kind of testing the waters. Um, and I wrote it because, well, I used to be a developer many, many years ago, but I wrote it because I go, well, if I'm going to talk about AI, I better actually use it. So I went and I built a bunch of applications. So one of them was this. The point is that technology is no longer remote. That would have taken, the reason we needed venture capital in the past was because we needed to get a whole bunch of engineers, back-end engineers, front-end React engineers. We had all these different engineers. Well, we don't need that. We don't need to do that anymore. I mean, basically, I sit there with Claude or with Lovable or whatever, and I because I actually know sort of what I'm doing, I don't need all those engineers. So what do we need the capital for? Well, it's really going to be more not around product engineering, because the technology is not really the big moat. What's really needed is market engineering, and that still is expensive. It's expensive because not initially. It requires intelligence, speaking differently, talking about new things and ideas, and that is the differentiation. Which is, if you can speak intelligently about a business problem, these workflows, in AI I call them work streams. If you can talk intelligently about these things, and people want to associate with you, because you think differently, you speak differently, you have these different concepts, they're going to align with you. They want to go to your parties, they want to go to your conference, they want to read your books, etc. We're still human. In the end, humans are still in the loop of these buying decisions in almost every instance, even when we have these agentic systems that come online. And in the end, there is still a human being involved at some point. And humans want to associate with other like-minded, smart, capable humans. And so that's why I think this market engineering work is even more important today than it ever was, because technology, it used to be some kind of a moat that we would have, as you appropriately stated, which is it could take years to develop these, a product. Not now. Not, I think one of the teams I work with said, we don't really want to use Salesforce anymore. So they just basically rewrote Salesforce over a weekend. Just the pieces they wanted, and none of the rest. So that's going to happen to all these CRUD applications, what we consider these systems of record. The most of those are not going to be a moat. They're going to get replaced over time. What won't get replaced is the data. So those companies do have significant advantage. Those companies with experience in industries, vertical or even horizontally, with people who understand the workflows of those industries, it's not going to be, people aren't going to align because of their tech. They're going to align because those people are smart and know what they're doing, and they have a lot of experience outside of that own company. They work with lots of others and can bring that experience. So I think the differentiation, this market engineering work, is super critical. And by the way, AI is not a replacement for your brain or innovation. AI, today, most AI, I can talk about the kind of AI I've worked with to develop this neurosymbolic recursive AI. But LLM AI, the transformer-based AI, is just basically probabilistic. It's like what word is probably going to happen next. It looks magical and wonderful, but it's not inventive. Humans are still doing the preponderance of invention. And so, yeah, at some point we might have, superior intellect that does more of this. But for right now, I believe that market engineering, those tenets, those 5 things, will be a significant differentiator for companies for the foreseeable future.
We almost touched on this a little bit in your last answer there, but in our last podcast, we kind of discussed aligning culture with category and growth. And how does kind of an effective market narrative help employees understand the company's purpose in all this and get everybody kind of aligned?
Yeah, so in the due diligence I did, the market research and stuff for the book, this new book, one of the things that emerged that I actually don't talk about in the book, but I do talk about in my newsletter and a few other things, is that the the one thing that really differentiated beyond just the positioning, the messaging, et cetera, of the technologies, et cetera, of the companies that went on to become billion-dollar market leaders, there was something more than technology that exists. There was a cause.
Mm-hmm.
And that cause can be captured in a charter. The charter is the internal manifestation of why are you doing this? If you think about Patagonia, right? They have a cause beyond just selling you, vests and clothes and whatever. Their cause is sustainability, right? Environmental. The best companies have those causes, and what they do is they attract those causes, attract people to want to work for your company, and they also want to attract consumers or businesses that want to work with your company. So you have to add. There's these 3 documents, these artifacts I call them, that I always work on with clients. 2 are described in the book. This market blueprint, which is the way the market currently exists and maybe a new category name, et cetera. And then the messaging matrix, which is your positioning and messaging together. But this 3rd piece that I actually don't talk about in the book is called a market charter. And I think that's critical. It was one of those epiphanies I had sort of after the book had already gone into the into publication.
We've got your next book. You get your next book.
Exactly. So I realized, I go, well, it's not just great market engineering, but it's this cause. It's this, can you compel the world to want to help you to be successful? For a variety of reasons, not just because you're going to make a lot of money. That doesn't usually compel a lot of people to want to help you. They want to be part of something that they feel is socially beneficial, et cetera. And that's even more so today than my generation. When I started, I was just happy to have a job. Today.
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's a shift in generation too.
Yeah,
but that's also the work that we put in, Bruce. After 40 years or whatever in the workplace, we're like,
yeah,
we want to have a job that's something we actually enjoy with meaning. But
I was just happy to be a salt miner. That was today. At least people have a little bit more character.
But it's so important now. It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thinking about that a little bit makes me, I'm thinking about, so where do empathy and like genuine customer understanding fit into engineering a market?
Well, I think if you have to be authentic, so you can fabricate all of this stuff and people look at it and go, that's crap.
Yeah, it's not going to stick. Yeah. And
Exactly.
they're trying to do that. You see that all the time and it just fails miserably on the market.
That's right.
Yeah.
So empathy, I think, is a critical piece of, it should be part of every company's thought process. And the reason I say market engineering, by the way, I like engineering because it says, okay, there is a process. It's a repeatable. It can be it's professional, et cetera. And so the most of marketing is not thought of that way. It's thought of, it's this creative stuff that you do, and random acts of marketing, random acts that somehow come together for one company and works magically for them. And why aren't we included? So the point is here, I think empathy, which is, okay, here's the problem that a company that we want to provide our product to. What is that person? What is that group? Or what is that company experiencing? Because basically day to day, you are effectively having to fix things. Now, they may be different things that you're fixing, your team, a product, whatever, a process, but it's basically a never-ending story of fixing. And so it can become really debilitating mentally, physically for people, because that's what when you wake up in the morning, you got a list of crap that you got to get done. So if you can put yourself into the shoes of the people who you're trying to solve a problem for, and you can speak authentically to that problem and be empathetic to it, people, I think, because we're human, because in the end humans are making these decisions, you are more likely to become successful. And again, it needs to be authentic. It can't just be words on a piece of paper, right? It can't be your S1 that you filed or whatever. It can't be that crap. It has to be true. People, because Glassdoor and these other, sites will tell you the impedance mismatch between what's being said by the company and what's actually going on inside the company. Those two things have to align, or you will struggle.
That's why we started this podcast. That's pretty much, I mean, the crux of it, right? You've got to have that alignment. It's got to be authentic. And then when you can get that, that's where you get that, just that emotional connection. That's really true that people feel. And that's where you get that lifetime customer value increasing and all that. But it's all got to come together, and it's all got to be authentic. And it can't just be, like you said, some of the,
I'm curious. Have you always been of this thought, or were you more back in the day? B2B was more transactional in your mind. Has this been more something you've evolved into, or has this always been your thought?
It's something
I talked about this many years ago. I'm like, oh, I think Bruce has evolved his thinking on this.
I have.
Okay.
So to
please share that, because there's other people who still think B2B is very transactional. Like you did.
I think most companies
are. Wow, Bruce has evolved on this idea. So, like, what did that for you? I'm curious.
Okay. Well, I mean, I worked for Oracle for many years. So for those of you who know Oracle, I don't need to say a lot more. But for maybe those who don't, it was a very interesting company to work for in the 80s and 90s, and maybe even still, I don't know, but I haven't been there for many years. But there was the case where you had to make a commitment, for your quota. So the joke was, that around a breakfast that the hen's involved, but the pig is committed. So the store, basically, if you made a commitment and to I won't name people, but to the head of sales, and you didn't make that commitment, you were gone. So and it was a pretty ruthless environment like that, and that's what I grew up in, for many, many years. And many of the people I work with, names that you'll all recognize if I say them, grew up in that. And so, but what we learned in the process was you completely beat down people. A lot of them stopped producing well, over a period of time. And it was a completely, terrible environment to work within, for many reasons. Financially, it was fine. But all the other, tangible things that you were looking for out of a career as opposed to a job, those things were missing. And I think what happened is that in the process, not only that was true inside of Oracle, and I hate to call everybody out there, but I mean, that was just, I think people understand that was kind of the way it is or was. What I think happened was a lot of us left and went on to do other things, and we realized, well, we didn't have to act all that way. You could still become successful without some of the other negative aspects of that. And I think that also happened in society. I think we realized that, hey, we don't need to browbeat people. We don't need to make their jobs miserable, whatever. And if we do, they leave, because there are other opportunities, and some of our best people would leave. So I think what I've become really, I think, at least sensitive to is, we have to do both. We have to make it a place that people really want to be, because they spend the majority of their time, in these positions, and there's other opportunities that they can pursue. So I've kind of come around on that. I again, I kind of go back to the old school stuff, back when I started, which was, I was just thankful that I had a job that I could make my rent payment and keep my wife happy and stuff. So that, fortunately, I think we have evolved as a society. Maybe not every company, maybe not every group,
it is evolves the right word. And I do think this is the way I've kind of put it lately, is that this is capitalism maturing. right? And I think you've kind of illustrated that perfectly with that story of just kind of moving from that area,
actually stepping into what it was supposed to be. Really, that's part of the maturity. It's like
ultimately, yeah. But
yeah,
it's not. I mean, most people are stuck, I'd say, in kind of where you were, in that transactional environment, and we're trying to make more of those conversations. That doesn't.
Yeah, and
have
the question you have
way.
to ask yourself is that really, are you successful because of that or in spite of that? I think that's really that's really what you have to ask.
I love that
question.
And so, sometimes it manifests in the form of if I think this is me conjecturing that if you aren't like constantly digging and pushing and really browbeating people in whatever role, that they'll just slack off and they won't do the work. They won't be detail oriented. They won't show up early or work late or whatever it is. And there may be some truth into some of that, but I think for the most part, if they're bought into the cause of the company, they're bought into what you're doing, you don't have to do a lot of that. A lot of people just are self-motivated. If they're not that kind of person, they wouldn't be in that. This brings up a good point around culture. So let me pull that together with this. As a venture capitalist, I was asked to interview candidates. Like a sales gal or a marketing guy or whatever. And I looked at it and I went, I don't think, why am I interviewing this person? I'm interviewing them for a skill. I go, no, I'm going to find the best person I know that's doing that skill in a company of that size. And I found those people and I had them do the skills-based interview. And then instead, I interviewed based on culture, at least what I believed that the culture of the company was going to be. And I wouldn't question them on I assumed somebody else, the only reason they're talking to me was because they had the skills that somebody else had interviewed them for. What I didn't know was, hey, are you culturally aligned with the way this company, operates? And more importantly, you should be asking me why I invested. That's I shouldn't be grilling you. You should be grilling me on why do I think this is going to be a successful company? Why should I join this? So I always came from the standpoint of, I want you to work for me, for this company, because I assume that somebody else has interviewed you for the skills that we need. I want you to work here because I know without you, we're unlikely to be as successful. And so I want to answer for you. I want to sell you on working for this company, which is not the way most people. I remember interviewing with some VCs, when I was looking at other jobs, and it was all grilling me on, how do you know how come you're so smart? Why can you do this or whatever? I used to think, have you actually done the job that you're interviewing me for? Do you really know? Have you ever built a company? What qualifies you to even be interviewing me? So I never thought about it as interviewing. I always thought about it as selling. I wanted to sell them. And so I think culture, that becomes critically important. Interviewing for culture, I think is critical.
And I think there's a point there too, like, and we've done this where, yeah, we shift to the people with the skills interviewing the other people with the skills. But if your culture is so good, they're also going to be feeling out whether they want to work with this person and whether it fits the culture. So you can have them even handle that culture fit part too, because this is like, hey, this is someone we're working with. Are we a match? Are we going to be a match for our culture?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of companies do. They have 5 different panels, right? Or they have people, right, who interview this candidate, somebody from engineering, somebody from sales, whatever. But their job is in finance. None of those people know anything about that job. So why not have somebody who's an expert in the job interview for skill? And then the rest is cultural interviews. And I don't know what the resign rate is, but I think it's pretty high for the executives. Like within the first year, if you talk to recruiters, who just keep their fingers crossed because they don't get paid until they don't get to keep the payment until the person lasts for a certain amount of time. you talk to recruiters and they are going, oh, I hope this works out. I hope that, that this person fits in. And so that's what we really mean by fitting in, right? Because different cultures appeal to different people. And to your point, I would have those panels be interviewing for culture. I'd find somebody else who's skilled in that area. Assume that none of those interviews take place unless that person passed the skill test.
The truth of the matter is, especially with senior executives, you know whether you're the right fit for the role better than anybody else. So really just create enough of an understanding for the individual to figure out, can I step into this, be excited, breathe this, live this every day? Is this what I want to be part of? Because if you actually trust the other person, they will determine whether it's the right fit for them. But it's often the opposite. It's like, are they the right fit for us? Well, give them the information, because the person's going to know. You know what you're capable of, unless you're, especially at that level, you're not making this stuff up, because you're going to get caught. So, so you know where it's going to be the right fit. So the best thing you do is expose to them, this is the environment, this is what's going on, and have them figure out for themselves, like, do I want to be part of this? Because you want someone who's going to join you who wants to be part of it, not someone you just convinced to try to make it look good on paper with the VC that you hired a top-notch guy or gal, right? So I love that you did that, because that's how it should be. Like, give the person an opportunity to determine, do I want to be part of this? So that when they do, they're all in, They get to have a whole conversation just to
exactly. I know we kind of went off on that, but but I do believe that's critically important with the companies we're building.
All right, Bruce, where can listeners learn more about you, Traction Gap Partners, the book, all of that?
Yeah, so the book, Market Engineering, because markets don't build themselves, is available on any of your favorite online bookstores now. It also has in the back has a QR code that if you like what you read in the book, you can activate the different projects through an application I built, all AI native. So of course, so so you can get access to that as well. And I have my own firm called Traction Gap Partners at tractiongappartners.com, and we work with clients at all stages, large enterprises down to small, teeny weeny ideas. It's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun doing this, and mostly for give back. Mostly because I had I think a pretty good career working with some pretty interesting people along the way in companies, and I try to give back that feedback to them.
Bruce, thank you for joining us again on the Bliss Business Podcast. Thank you to our listeners too for listening. Go pick up the book, and we were talking about this with Bruce beforehand, and he mentioned that QR code. Read the book, go through it all, and then go through that experience and see if that really helps you bring these thoughts to life. These things that he's talking about help go from system to actualization, I guess would be the way to put that. But thanks again, everyone, for joining the Bliss Business Podcast, and we will see you next time.